Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. He could have slid down with the axe like Kratos. He yanked the axe out and swung down to the next spot, then hacked again. Swing, chop, swing, chop. In no time, he made it to the cave. One last swing and pull, a thrust from his core, and he jumped inside. Good thing his core strength was solid. This kind of move really tested core muscles. New humans are awesome. Luzin thought to himself as both feet landed inside the cave. It was a cave dug along the cliff face. The ceiling and 3 walls were reinforced with logs, and the floor was tiled with rectangular ceramic tiles. One wall even had a small fireplace built into it. Luzin peeked outside. The chimney extended out the cliff behind that wall. Looked like it had been chiseled out and fitted with a pipe. The interior was simple. A small table and a bin-bag chair. The chair had grown moldy and wasn't usable anymore. On the table was a hot water kettle and a military green enamel mug, its paint long chipped off. If you called this a shelter, it was more like a place to hide from mountain beasts. Or better yet, a mountain campsite rather than a proper shelter. Luzin thought to himself, if this were the old world, I'd probably love resting in a place like this during a wilderness trip. Kicking back in the bin bag, listening to the sounds of the forest. But in the apocalypse, it wasn't fit for living. No wonder Fang Shuxin only came here to pick up radio signals, not to hide out long term. Still, Luzin was puzzled. Compared to the gas station, this place was way more remote. Shouldn't the signal be worse? Why couldn't Fang Shuxin pick up a signal at home but could get it here? Since he couldn't figure out a clear reason, he chalked it up to differences between 2 worlds. Luzin pushed the thought aside. No use thinking about stuff that didn't matter anymore. Time to search. The cave wasn't big. Everything inside could be seen at a glance. Luzin saw the chair and table, the kettle and enamel mug, but oddly, no radio. The one Fang Shuxin had mentioned. Should have brought Doggy down. He thought to himself. But the cave was up on a cliff. Bringing the mechanical dog over wouldn't be easy. If it fell and broke, that would be a huge loss. Better to just search thoroughly himself. Luzin gave the place another close look. He moved the table and chair aside, even picked up the bin bag and shook it, but found nothing. As he looked around, his gaze suddenly landed on the fireplace carved into the wall. The one Fang Shuxin had hacked out himself. Something clicked in his mind. He reached into the fireplace and tapped along its interior walls. Dong dong dong. Finally, a distinct hollow sound came from the top of the fireplace. He fumbled around and felt a notch. He stuck a finger in and pulled down. Something rectangular and a little soft slid into his hand. He pulled it out. It was something wrapped in cloth. He peeled back the layers of fabric. Inside was a black, cold rectangle with a row of metal buttons on top. At the front end was a speaker sealed with a mesh cover. A radio, just as expected. He pressed a few buttons on top. No response. He checked the back and found a panel. He twisted it open. Completely empty. No batteries. Well, how convenient. Luzin remembered the battery model from the drone and couldn't help but smile. Lady Luck had blessed him once again. And now, he had the batteries. Chapter 50, Radio. Luzin really did feel pretty lucky. The fact that the radio didn't have batteries inside might actually be better than if it had. Batteries can leak, after all. If there had been batteries left in this radio and they'd leaked, it could have ruined the whole thing. Now, whether the radio worked or not, at least he could rule out battery leakage as a possible cause of damage. With the experience of finding the radio, Luzin tapped on the 3 log walls, the ceiling, and the small tiled floor. But came up empty. Still, he wasn't disappointed. Just being able to find the radio on this trip was already a pretty decent win. Even Yao-Wei's car didn't have a radio. And if he hadn't come here, how would he have ever seen this cave dug into the side of a cliff in the old world? Getting to see a strange and novel place like this was nice too. He stashed the radio away and climbed out of the cave, using the same method as before. Hacking his axe into the cliff wall to climb up. But climbing up was harder than coming down. It required an extra move and way more effort. He had to draw his body upward, push off hard with his legs, use the momentum to jump up, pull out the axe, then chop again. Just like that, he worked his way up. When he got near the top, Yao reached out to help him. After surviving in the apocalypse for so long, Yao's hands were rough. Just like his. But even with the calluses, her hands were warm and soft, and actually felt kind of nice. Luzin felt like her hand was way warmer than his, but judging from how energetic she looked, it didn't seem like she had a fever. New humans didn't really get fevers anyway. Maybe this woman was just naturally like that. You good? Once he got up, Luzin let go of her hand and asked. Yeah. No one came by, Yao replied. She was doing way better now than when they first met. Back then, she absolutely wouldn't have said a single extra word. Even something like yeah. No one came by. She would have just stopped at the first 2 words. No way she would have added the last 4. But now, things were different. And after saying that, Yao even asked, what about you? How was it down there? Luzin said, not much in there. Just a table, a beanbag chair, a kettle, and a cup. All moldy, can't use any of it. Yao asked curiously, beanbag chair? Luzin explained, that soft, saggy kind of chair, no back support. If you sit in it too long, it's bad for your back. Oh. Yao nodded, indicating she understood. She obviously didn't know what a beanbag chair looked like, but hearing it was bad for your back if you sat too long, she figured it was useless and lost interest. Luzin took out the radio and said, there's a fireplace in there. I found the radio on top of it. Must have been where Fang Shuxin hid it before he left for the last time. But there are no batteries inside, so I haven't tested it yet. No idea if it still works. Yao, just like Luzin, immediately thought of something and said, we've got batteries in the car. Luzin smiled. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. They got back into the car. Luzin handed the radio to Yao and let her mess with it while he started the vehicle and backed out of the area. The mountain road was too narrow to turn around, so he just threw it in reverse and backed out. As a seasoned driver, this wasn't a big deal for him. Just needed to go a bit slower and keep an eye on the rearview mirror. Yao sat in the front passenger seat and pulled out the batteries for the radio. She carefully took out 2 new ones, making sure not to damage the packaging so the remaining 2 batteries could still be tightly wrapped. That long-ingrained habit of frugality. Yao hadn't lost it. Even something as simple as opening a battery pack, she was super cautious to avoid messing up any small details later. While she was installing the batteries, Luzin glanced over twice to make sure she didn't mess up the polarity. Luckily, Yao knew what she was doing. Maybe she'd used stuff like this before. Once the batteries were in and the cover snapped shut, Luzin guided her to press the power switch on top of the radio. Right away, there was a faint zzz sound. That was the sound of static from the speaker. The radio wasn't picking up any signal. Luzin suddenly hit the brakes and said, Fang Shuxin said he couldn't get a signal at his house, but he could hear. Let's stay a bit and try adjusting the channel? Okay. Yao nodded, then asked, how do I adjust it? She knew how to put in batteries, but didn't really know how to operate a radio, so she had to ask Luzin. There's a dial next to the buttons on top. Turn it, Luzin instructed her, then asked, should we drive the car back to the original spot? Yao looked out the window and said, we haven't gone very far. True, Luzin nodded, then turned off the engine and pulled the handbrake. They both got out of the car. Luzin simply took the radio from Yao's hands and started adjusting it himself. Yao pressed her lips together. She kind of wanted to try it herself, but she also knew this wasn't playtime. It was serious. The look on her face changed for just a moment, but Luzin noticed. I'll test it first, then you can try it, he said. I'm not playing with it. Yao muttered with a bit of annoyance. She felt like Luzin was treating her like a little kid. That tone, those words. Only her mom had talked to her like that when she was small. Okay, not playing. You can have it in a bit, Luzin brushed it off while turning the dial on top of the radio. Yao. That same tone again. What the hell is up with this guy? Kinda annoying now? But Luzin was already fully focused on the radio and didn't notice her faintly resentful expression. He kept fiddling with the dial. Left, right, forward, backward, raising it up, lowering it, even climbed higher with his axe, or jumped back down into the cliff cave. Luzin tried all sorts of things, but all he got from the radio was that same persistent static. Nothing else. After trying for a long while, Luzin finally gave up. Forget it. Maybe the rebuilders are gone. Or maybe no one's using this kind of thing anymore. Let's go. Yao didn't object and got back into the car with him. Luzin tossed the radio over to Yao, then reversed the car out of the mountain road. Yao Wei held onto the thing and, mimicking Luzin's moves, gave it a try herself. Even though she knew it probably didn't work anymore, she still wanted to test it. Just once. Then I'll take the batteries out. That's what she was thinking. Trying it once or twice wouldn't count as wasteful, right? But as she turned the dial, she suddenly noticed the static was starting to change. Quan ZZZZZZZ. Command. ZZZZZZZ. Chapter 51, Is this considered an oasis? There's actually a signal? Luzin slammed on the brakes and exchanged a glance with Yao Wei. He shifted to neutral and pulled the handbrake. Both of them opened the doors and jumped out of the car at the same time. Yao Wei handed the radio to Luzin to operate, while she picked up her gun to keep watch. At the same time, she kept glancing over at Luzin, occasionally eyeing the radio in his hand. ZZZ. ZZZZ. ZZZZ. National Emergen. Head. ZZZZZZ. Please. ZZZ. ZZZZZZ. Luzin kept moving around, taking a few steps to the left with the radio, then a few steps to the right, sometimes lowering it, sometimes holding it up. There was always static coming from the radio. But when he moved to certain spots, the static would be mixed with voices, like someone was broadcasting information. After trying a few positions, he found the signal was a bit better near the front passenger seat and in another open area. But that open area was way too exposed and didn't seem worth checking further, so Luzin walked over to the passenger side, opened a door, stepped up, grabbed the door frame, and leapt up onto the roof. There was a spare tire on the roof. Luzin crouched on top of it, and the signal got a bit better. ZZZZZ. National Emergency Relief Command Center. ZZZZ. National Emergency Relief Command Center, we. ZZZ. Please. Luzin frowned and turned to ask Yao Wei, is there really still something like a National Emergency Relief Command Center in this world? Yao Wei said, I've never heard of it. That Luo Ping from before never mentioned it either. If a place like that really existed now, Luo Ping would have been eager to respond or try to find it, right? Then what's up with the voice on this radio signal? And besides, in this world today, it's probably been decades since the whole planet fell into catastrophe. Who's still talking about emergency relief? This National Emergency Relief Command Center. Could it be just another relic from the past like those rebuilders or the hedonists? Luzin asked again. But he couldn't figure it out. Even if it was an old relic that somehow kept going until now, it should at least know the current situation, right? Why would it still be using a name like emergency relief? And in a world this ruined, who's even able to hear this kind of broadcast anymore? Yao Wei shook her head too, equally confused. Still full of questions, Luzin stood up, raised the radio high, and slowly turned in every direction. When he turned to face a certain spot toward the east, the static suddenly lessened, and the mixed-in voice finally became clear. This is the National Emergency Relief Command Center. This is the National Emergency Relief Command Center. Attention all regions, the catastrophe is not over. Experts have analyzed that this will be a prolonged disaster and cannot be resolved in a short time. All regions, please conserve energy, maintain water and power systems as best as possible, allocate supplies reasonably, and ensure civilian access. This center will broadcast guidance daily at 18:00 via radio. Regions with functional communication stations, please use radio to contact this center as soon as possible. We will continually scan multiple frequencies in an effort to establish contact. If any region faces supply shortages and cannot sustain itself, and if conditions allow, you may migrate to this center. We have deployed forces in the new district of Donghai City, building a temporary base around the local power and water plants. Power and water are still functioning, supplies are sufficient, and we are ready to receive people from other areas. This is the National Emergency Relief Command Center. This is the National Emergency Relief Command Center. The message began to repeat. Luzin listened for a while longer, let out a breath, jumped down from the car, and said, there's no new info. Sounds like it's a recorded broadcast. Looks like the power supply over there really is holding up well. Yeah. Yao Wei nodded. She quickly got back into the car and sat in the passenger seat. When Luzin returned to the driver's seat, he saw Yao Wei flipping through World Atlas as she flipped through many pages before finally finding the page for Donghai City. She pointed with her slender finger and said, found the water plant, but the map doesn't show the power plant. Luzin thought for a second and said, you think? Maybe it's a nuclear power plant? Places like that usually aren't marked on maps, right? Yao Wei fell silent for a moment, then nodded. Yeah. Maybe. Luzin scratched his head. So, what do you think? Can we still go there? If someone's maintaining it, that's one thing. But if no one is, I really don't want to imagine what it's like now. Yao Wei said, we can't go. Luzin turned to look at her, saw her serious expression, and asked, "You've been to a nuclear power plant before?" Yao Wei said, "Never been inside. But I've seen one." There was an explosion. The people and animals living nearby all mutated. Looked horrible, and were fragile. Those places are way too dangerous. It's best not to get close. Looks like that kind of place really left a strong impression on her. She actually said that many words in one go. Luzin nodded. "All right. Then let's forget about that for now and keep moving." He started the car and continued heading west. The round trip back to the Eternal Heaven petrochemical gas station wasn't far, so there was no need to refuel. They hadn't used much fuel anyway. If he stuck the fuel nozzle in now, it'd probably just click off right away. Besides, they still had a full can of gas in the car. Heading west wouldn't be as anxiety-inducing as before. No rush to top off the tank just yet. The car passed the gas station and the two-story building beside it. That building was still deserted, overrun with weeds that swallowed the front door. There were no traces of their previous visit at all. Further ahead, the land was still covered in wild grass, the sky vast and thick with clouds, shadows like a curtain. As Luzin drove, a thought popped into his head. He asked Yao Wei, "Do you think? Could that place be what people think of as an oasis?" Yao Wei didn't quite catch his meaning at first. "What?" she asked. "That National Emergency Relief Command Center," Luzin said. "It said in the radio that the power and water are still working, supplies are abundant, and they're accepting people from other areas. For people who can't survive, wouldn't that count as an oasis?" Yao Wei thought for a moment and replied, "I guess. Yeah." But Luzin followed up, "Then by that logic, for Fang Shuxin, wouldn't the rebuilders count as an oasis too?" Yao Wei paused and thought a bit more before saying, "I don't know." Luzin took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "The world's a big place. But where is the oasis, really?" "I don't know." That was still Yao Wei's answer. Luzin suddenly turned to look at her and said, "Yao Wei, what do you think? If we get the chance to go to Donghai City, maybe keep a bit of distance and check it out? We've got Dogsy and the drone. We can send Dogsy in to scout it out." Chapter 52, Cold Wave Routine. What Luzin said sounded like he had already decided he'd be traveling with Yao Wei for a long time. Donghai City was as far from their current location as it could possibly be. After all, they were still up north, while Donghai City was already on the eastern coastal edge of the map. It was hard to imagine how anyone who heard the broadcast back then could have made it all the way to Donghai City. This bitter cold wasn't like it was now, with alternating warm and cold days. In extreme weather, even transportation was limited. If the new district in Donghai City was an oasis, then for the people here, it was probably an unreachable one. After hearing what Luzin said, Yao Wei glanced at the mechanical dog and gave a small nod. She, too, seemed to have accepted that Luzin would be traveling with her for a long time, and didn't seem to mind. Dogsy had already transformed into a box shape, lying quietly at Yao Wei's feet in the front passenger seat, as if it had accepted all arrangements without resistance. Mengxin City was even more desolate and vast compared to Yubai City. Luzin felt like he was back further north again, driving freely without obstruction. The only real concern was whether they could restock supplies. There was hardly any fear of encountering people. They bounced along all day on broken roads, passing 3 gas stations. 2 labeled Menghai Petroleum and 1 Eternal Heaven Petrochemical. The Menghai Petroleum stations looked pretty bad. Most of the fuel pumps were broken. Only one was still functional, and although the screen showed a fuel reading when powered on, no fuel actually came out. At that point, the gas can they got from Sloppy Broll Woking finally came in handy. After the car ran out of gas, they pulled out the can and poured the stored fuel into the tank. They drove on for a bit longer and finally reached another Eternal Heaven petrochemical gas station, where they filled up both the car and the gas can. Rivers were scarce in Mengxin City. After driving all day, Luzin didn't come across a single one. According to Yao Wei's map, they still had quite a way to go before reaching a river. But by then, night had fallen. Luzin and Yao Wei pulled over by the roadside, used up some of their firewood and stored water, and made a fire to cook. After eating, they found a slightly elevated, somewhat concealed hill to park the car, turned off the engine, pulled up the blankets, and went to sleep. The wilderness of Mengxin City was full of wild grass. The only place suitable for making a fire was the road. Step off the road, and it was all dry brush. Starting a fire there could trigger a large blaze. Not that it would matter much in this Doomsday world. It wouldn't affect anyone. But there was no need to take that risk, and it could expose their location. So Luzin and Yao Wei chose to light their fire at the roadside. The surrounding terrain was open. As long as Yao Wei kept watch while Luzin cooked, they were fine. After dinner, they went to sleep. The nights in Mengxin City seemed different from elsewhere. Strong winds howled endlessly outside the car. Wrapped in blankets, Luzin and Yao fell asleep listening to the wind. Partway through the night, they both suddenly felt the air turn much colder. Pulling the blankets tighter didn't seem to help. Feels like the cold waves back, Luzin said. Yao was already awake. The sky was pitch black. No stars, no moon. They couldn't see each other's eyes but still instinctively glanced at one another. Should we turn on the air conditioner? Luzin asked. Normally, running the AC while sleeping in a car is dangerous. It requires idling the engine, which could lead to carbon monoxide poisoning. But in their case, the car used an external air conditioner, which eliminated the issue entirely. Then there's the risk of oxygen depletion in a sealed space over long periods. But Luzin was confident in his enhanced new human body and wasn't worried. Same for Yao. So the external AC was really the best setup for this car. Yao answered again. Luzin said, "Dogsy, turn on the AC." The Dogsy at Yao's feet immediately stirred, transforming back from a box into its dog shape, and jumped to the back seat to open the power socket panel on its back. Just as Luzin was about to turn over and plug in the AC, Yao said, "I'll do it," beat him to it, threw off the blanket, turned over, found the AC plug, and stuck it into Dogsy's back. VRRR. The AC hummed to life. Yao kept staring at its location until warm air began to flow through the car. Only then did she relax and crawl back under the blanket. Since installing the AC in the car, they'd only used it once. And that was just to test the cooling function. So now that she confirmed the heating worked, she finally felt at ease. "Sleep," Luzin said. Yao answered, and her breathing slowly grew calm and steady. Listening to Yao's sleeping breath, Luzin also drifted off. The warm air from the AC made everything feel lazier and more comfortable. It was way better than back in the Tan Village shelter in Fengzheng County. Back then, all they could do was pile on extra blankets to sleep. When they woke up the next morning, Luzin stretched comfortably and said, "Man, that felt great. Do you think back when we were in the shelter, we should have just come back to the car and slept with the AC on?" The new human body really exceeded Luzin's expectations. In his old life, spending the night with the AC running in such a tiny space would have made him feel sick. But now, not even the slightest discomfort. He still didn't know what type of new human he was. But surprisingly, Yao had a different opinion this time. The bed is still better. Fair enough. Sleeping in the car every day did make your back stiff. Beds had their own comfort. If you were more resistant to cold and used to harsh conditions, preferring a bed made perfect sense. Each has its pros, Luzin said. This time, Yao didn't disagree. The cold wave hadn't passed yet. But the good news was, this round of freezing temperatures hadn't brought snow. Which meant they could still hit the road. Driving along, Luzin couldn't help but sigh again. Man, having AC is the best. Back when we were in Yubai City, we had to wipe down the windows in weather like this. Yao nodded in total agreement. When they'd gone back to the villa at 272 Jiang Road in Yubai City during the cold, their breath had fogged up the windows due to the temperature difference. Visibility got so bad they had to keep wiping it down with a rag. Over and over again. But now, with heating in the car, warm air was somehow reaching the front windshield, and no fog was forming anymore. Pretty convenient. They drove for another half a day and finally reached the river. Braving the cold, they got out, chipped away at the ice, and filled the water buckets. It melted pretty quickly in the car, so they now had enough water stored again. As for firewood, there was nowhere to restock it just yet. They'd chipped away a good amount of ice, but what surprised them was that in one of the chunks, Luzin and Yao were shocked to find a fish frozen inside. Looks like the cold had hit so fast that the water froze before the fish had time to swim deeper to safety. It got frozen right where it was. They tossed the ice with the fish into a pot, and it melted soon after. To their surprise, once the ice melted into water, the fish actually started swimming again. Chapter 53, You're Different. Luzin and Yao stared at the fish in the water for a long time. The fish, oblivious to the human gaze, flicked its tail leisurely, swimming in slow circles, sending ripples across the water in the pot. To make sure there was enough water for the fish to swim, Luzin even poured some from the bucket into the pot. It really looked like he was preparing to cook it. The fish in the pot didn't even notice the change in water level, continuing to swim calmly and steadily, moving the same way over and over. This fish is really tough. Luzin couldn't help but sigh. Yeah. Yao nodded and said. Neither of them had paid attention to this kind of thing before. When the cold hit, they would hide away, not bothering to notice things like this. It was only now, with the air conditioner in the car keeping them mobile even in extreme cold, that they could drive to the riverside to cut through the ice and fetch water. Luzin guessed, maybe that's why the fish can survive in this kind of weather? I wonder how other animals make it through? Yao Wei shook her head and said, no idea. We never see them. They really didn't. Wild animals always hid somewhere humans couldn't see when the cold arrived. Sometimes he still had to walk a bit in sudden cold snaps, but those animals never seemed to have to. Luzin started to wonder if the animals that made it this far had developed some kind of early warning ability, like how ants move house or swallows fly low before a storm. Able to sense a cold snap coming and hide in time. If that was really the case, he wouldn't mind catching a small animal sometime to raise and observe it for a while. Luzin said, I wonder if Luo Ping knows about this kind of thing? That guy said he wanted to get inspiration from plants and animals to study this phenomenon. Might help him. Yao Wei said, no idea. She probably meant she didn't know whether Luo Ping knew or not. Luzin said, whatever, if we run into him again, we'll just tell him about it. What should we do with the fish? Keep watching it for a while or eat it with the next meal? Yao Wei thought for a moment and replied, observe it until the next meal and then eat it. Best of both worlds. No waste. So very Yao Wei. Luzin laughed, alright, then we'll observe it until the next meal. That next meal, as it turned out, was a long time later. It was too cold, and they weren't in the shelter at Jan village in Fengzheng County. Luzin and Yao Wei had no conditions for making a fire and cooking. If the cold snap lasted too long, they'd have to rely on dry rations to fill their stomachs when necessary. Luckily, they had plenty of rations for now, and they still had some compressed biscuits Luo Ping had given them. That stuff really kept you full. After cutting enough ice and filling both the bucket and the pot with water, they set off again. Heading west for a long while, a city finally appeared before them. The style of the city was totally different from Yubai City. Luzin had come all the way from the north, and every city he'd seen, whether ruined or intact, looked nothing like this one. The city name shown on Yao Wei's world atlas I was Tongzhou County. The county roads were wide, the tall buildings sparse. The style felt just like the grasslands and wilds outside the city. Spacious and desolate. But really, in this world now, where wasn't desolate? We have to go into this Tongzhou County, Yao Wei said while looking at the map as Luzin parked the car at a good spot outside the city. She added, there are too few gas stations in Mengxin City. If we can't get gasoline here, moving on could be risky. There was no need to spell out the risk. Yao Wei was worried they wouldn't be able to refuel further down the road. Luzin nodded and said, alright, then let's check it out. But Heaven had other plans. No sooner had he spoken than a single snowflake drifted down and stuck to the front windshield. That snowflake seemed like a scout. Right after it came, the whole world suddenly filled with white specks, even blocking their view. Luzin sighed and said, weather's not on our side. Let's wait a bit. Yao Wei nodded and said. In the blink of an eye, the ground was covered in a thick blanket of white. Driving in these conditions was extremely dangerous. If there were people holed up in the county, and they entered rashly, they might not be able to drive away quickly. In that case, they'd be forced into a direct confrontation, possibly a tough fight. Luzin might be a seasoned driver, but he wasn't confident enough to believe he could speed through icy streets without slipping. Whether it was going head-to-head with others over a car full of supplies or crashing the car into a wall, neither was a situation Luzin wanted to see. So he turned off the engine, took out 2 pieces of mini bread, and the 2 of them ate with some water, leaned the seats back, pulled up the blankets, and rested. The spot Luzin had picked was perfect. Surrounded by hills, with one peak acting as a screen that shielded them from view of the tall buildings at the county's edge. That way, they didn't have to worry about being spotted from the rooftops by anyone in the county. You think there'll be people in Tongzhou County? Lying down, Luzin didn't rush to sleep and asked. Yao Wei hadn't fallen asleep either. She turned her head and glanced toward the county from the car window, saying, no idea. In truth, there was nothing to see from the window. It was just a white blur outside. Even if someone was standing watch on a rooftop in the county, they probably couldn't see anything either. Situations like this were actually perfect for sneaking in, but opportunities came with risk, and neither Luzin nor Yao Wei wanted to put themselves in danger. So they decided to wait. If there are people in the county, do you think they'll be good or bad? Luzin asked another question. This time, Yao Wei answered without hesitation, bad. Luzin couldn't help but laugh. That confident, huh? You've never seen a good person? Yao Wei shook her head without saying anything. Seemed like she really hadn't. Luzin muttered, then what? I don't count as a good person. Yao Wei said, you're different. Luzin replied, how am I different? Are you saying I'm not human? Yao Wei turned to glance at Luzin but didn't feel like replying. She thought Luzin really liked talking nonsense sometimes. She liked listening, but not responding. Alright, sleep. Luzin pulled the blanket over his head and then said to the mechanical dog at Yao feet, "Dogsy, keep watch." Then he remembered. Dogsy was busy powering the air conditioner in the back. So he said, "Forget it, we'll keep watch ourselves." Yao said, "It's fine, I can sense danger if it comes." Luzin chuckled, "Your new human type must be different from mine. I don't have that function." Yao. She mimicked Luzin, pulling the blanket over her head too. The white snow outside lit up the world so brightly, it made sleeping uncomfortable. Luzin felt a bit regretful. When they left the shelter at Dan Village, he should have brought more bed sheets. Then they could have used them as curtains. Chapter 54, The People Inside. Listen up. The heavy snow lasted for 2 days. After 2 days, the snow stopped, and the weather quickly turned warm. Luzin and Yao had used up some water, so they went outside to replenish it with snow water. They watched the snow outside the car melt at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the entire grassland turned muddy. This kind of condition wasn't suitable for making a fire to cook, so the two of them ate some rations again to replenish their energy, then got the car back on the road. The muddy grassland had a bit of a slope, which made the car slide a little. Luzin had to drive very carefully, turning the steering wheel more and avoiding slamming on the gas pedal to prevent the wheels from getting stuck in the mud pit. Yao went to the back and unplugged the air conditioner's plug, and Dogsy, immediately came back to life. Luzin ordered, "Dogsy, come to the front and stay alert. Send out the drone." Dogsy and Yao darted into the front row of the car. Yao grabbed a gun, checked the bullets, and switched off the safety. Dogsy, meanwhile, stopped at the car's front console, controlling the drone to fly out of the vehicle and scout ahead. Whoosh! A faint whistling sound came from far ahead. Both Luzin and Yao, with their sharp hearing, could hear it. They instantly went on alert. After the sound of air being pierced, came a wail. Like a dog in agony. Someone's hunting. Luzin understood and added, "Dogsy, have the drone lead us and avoid the people. Yao, point it toward the gas station." They came into town with the gas station as their destination. There was no need to check anywhere else. They just hoped the gas station wasn't already occupied. Yao nodded, compared the map, and gave Dogsy 2 directions. There were 2 gas stations in the county town of Dongsu. One in the city center, and one on the southwestern edge. Yao had Dogsy lead them toward the southwestern corner first. Since there were people in the city, they were likely further inside, and the outskirts were relatively safer. If the edge of the city wasn't passable, they could always head to the gas station in the center. Dogsy stayed still at the front console. When they reached the intersection, Dog's eyes lit up and shone to the left. So Luzin turned the steering wheel and made a left turn. Up ahead, at least 3 people were talking. They were close enough that the voices could be heard. Old-sounding voices saying things like, "This dog will feed us for days, and what luck, it was all alone." Luzin just hoped those voices didn't belong to new humans. If they were, then the sound of the car might have already given them away. But judging by the hoarse, aged tone, they were probably not new humans. Luzin didn't drive fast. That way the tires wouldn't make too much noise and attract attention. They drove along, turned a corner, and under Dogsy's guidance, avoided people and ran into a startled dog before finally reaching the gas station. It was a mutt, not very big, but it looked healthy. Who knew if purebred dogs still existed in this world? If they did, those with genetic defects probably wouldn't have survived this long anyway. There was no one at the gas station, but the problem was, the circuit here was broken. After Dogsy connected to the electrical panel, it couldn't power the fuel pump. Luzin and Yao had no choice but to ask Dogsy to guide them to the other gas station in the city. That gas station was located along the central axis of the county, on a street labeled Danksin Street in World Atlas Volume 1. East-west were called streets, and north-south were roads. The naming rules for roads in this world were the same as in the previous one. Along the way to Danksin Street, they didn't run into a single person, nor did they need to keep turning to change routes. They went straight to Danksin Street, then turned east toward the gas station. This station was also a Eternal Heaven petrochemical gas station. This chain was pretty big in Mengxin City. But just as they were approaching the gas station, Dogsy's dog eyes flashed twice. Luzin immediately braked and said, "There are people inside the gas station." Yao nodded, stared in that direction, and raised a gun in her hand. Luzin said, "Dogsy, make sure it's safe first, then try to confirm how many people are in there. Don't let the drone get damaged." Dogsy immediately began operating the drone according to orders, flying it into the gas station. Inside the station, chaos erupted. Squawking chickens, barking dogs, and several people shouting. But the gunfire that Luzin and Yao were expecting never came. Instead, a bunch of random junk was thrown at the drone. From a distance, Luzin and Yao saw all kinds of stuff flying through the air. Wrenches, bricks, small knives, and so on. They really didn't expect that the people here had the same kind of hobby. Collecting all kinds of random hidden weapons. Luzin let out a sigh of relief. Among all those hidden weapons, there was even an arrow. But the one thing missing was bullets. That meant the group squatting in the gas station didn't have guns, which lowered the danger level. Under Dogsy's control, the drone skillfully dodged all the projectiles and flew back. Then Dogsy's dog eyes flashed 6 times, indicating that it had seen 6 people through the drone. Luzin asked, 6? You sure? Dogsy's eyes flashed 3 more times, meaning it wasn't certain. The drone had only observed from above. It couldn't get a close look. Did you see new humans or regular people? Luzin asked again, though he already had a guess in mind. Those hidden weapons didn't fly very fast, clearly thrown without much strength. If it were him, even tossing a random brick might have hit the drone. At the very least, it should have grazed it. Then Dogsy's eyes stayed lit, confirming Luzin's suspicion. How about we call out to them? Luzin asked. Yao glanced at him, a little confused. Call out what? Luzin said, like Luo Ping did. See if we can talk it out. If we can, we'll refuel and leave, and avoid wasting bullets in a fight. Okay. Yao nodded, then said nothing else. She clearly expected Luzin to do the talking. She knew full well she wasn't good at that sort of thing. Her eyes burned as she looked at Luzin, like she was looking forward to his performance. Thankfully, Luzin wasn't stage shy. He drove the car to the outside of the gas station and shouted, "People inside, listen up. We mean no harm. Just here to refuel the car. If you don't want trouble, say something. Let's came to an agreement. Once we're done refueling, we'll leave." No one responded from inside the gas station. Luzin and Yao couldn't even see anyone. Everyone inside had hidden themselves, using visual cover. There might even be people behind the fuel pumps. Luzin thought for a second, then shouted again, "Or if you've got no problem with it, just stay silent and wait in the room. Either way, I suggest you don't come at us. We've got plenty of bullets and don't want to waste them on you." Chapter 55, Goodwill or Malice. At this moment, Luzin really wished he had a big loudspeaker like Luo Ping's. Even if it wasn't mounted on the car roof, just holding it up to his mouth would have saved his voice. Luzin and Yao waited for a while, but there was no response from inside the gas station. Both of them knew they couldn't wait any longer. To secure fuel, they had no choice but to go into the gas station no matter what. They could only take it as the people inside the gas station having silently agreed to their proposal, and while staying on alert, they drove in. Dogsy, confirm their location first. Before shifting gears and stepping on the gas, Luzin ordered Dogsy to scout around first. After the drone took another loop through the gas station, the light in Dogsy's eyes flashed toward the station building, and both Luzin and Yao understood. That's where the people were hiding. The station building was on the inner side of the fuel pump, so Luzin drove over and parked on the outer side of the 2 fuel pumps, using them to slightly block the line of sight toward the building. Even though this gas station was occupied, it still had no electricity. It had been decades since the Doomsday began. What power plant could still be operational? If any power plant were still running, there should at least be some signs of civilization returning to this world. Would sloppy bro Luo Ping still be rushing around like that? The electrical panels over there. Yao gestured slightly with her gun barrel toward the side of the station building and spoke. Luzin immediately sent Dogsy to connect the power. The 2 of them stayed in the car, not rushing to get out, watching what would happen once the power was turned on. They both noticed that the station building's door cracked open just a bit. Someone was secretly peeking out. So they also had a good aim. If anything went wrong, they'd just shoot toward that door. Bzzz. The old fuel pump creaked back to life, groaning as if it were overburdened. But regardless, this fuel pump in front of them was still functional. The numbers that appeared on the fuel pump's screen after the groaning confirmed it. The 2 of them split up the tasks. Luzin turned off the engine, and Yao, holding her gun, got out of the car cautiously and operated the fuel pump. Just as Yao inserted the fuel nozzle into the car's fuel tank, the station building's door suddenly moved, and a small figure darted out. Yao quickly raised her gun and aimed, and Luzin also lifted his submachine gun. But then, upon taking a closer look, they were shocked to find that the one who had come out of the building was a child, who looked only about 3 or 4 years old. The kid's hair was a tangled mess like a bird's nest, lips were cracked, and his cheeks were covered with fine red veins. Even though it had already warmed up, he was still bundled tightly, looking filthy. Seeing how he staggered out and almost fell, Luzin was certain this kid wasn't a new human. Luzin and Yao didn't open fire recklessly. They just kept alert, fingers lightly resting on the trigger. The gun wasn't aimed at the child. They kept watching the door that had opened because of him. An elderly, stooped man with a weathered face rushed out, scooped up the child, and kept bowing toward Luzin and Yao while carrying the kid back inside. Judging by this, the people in the station building didn't seem to be hostile. Creak. The station building's door closed again. Inside, it was dead silent, as if what had just happened was nothing but an accident. The people inside were showing their stance with this behavior, waiting quietly for Luzin and Yao to leave. Bzzz. The fuel pump kept struggling along, filling up the car's fuel tank. After that, Yao also took out a gas can from the car and topped it off. Throughout all this, there was no movement from the station building. With that, Luzin and Yao relaxed a little. Yao shoved the gas can back into the car, and after Luzin called Dogsy back, they were about ready to move on. But just then, the station building door creaked open again. Yao immediately leaned out of the car and raised her gun to aim. Luzin quickly started the engine, ready to shift gears and step on the gas. But no attack came from the doorway. That same elderly man from before carefully stepped out again. He was holding 2 bottled water containers. When he saw Luzin and Yao from afar, he quickly forced a flattering smile, revealing his yellow, rotting teeth. He looked completely harmless. He placed the bottled water on the ground and said fawningly, "Drink, drink." Then quickly retreated back into the station building. Luzin and Yao exchanged glances, puzzled. They were already planning to leave. This gesture of goodwill didn't seem necessary. But then that man's voice came from inside the station building. "You two are strong people. You spared us, and we're extremely grateful. These 2 bottles of water are our thanks. Offered as gratitude for your mercy. Please, take them." Luzin was silent for a moment and asked Yao, "Are we really this lucky? Coming from Jiang Road, first Luoping, now this gas station. How come we keep running into good people?" Yao shook her head and said, "Don't trust too easily." It was true. Surviving in this world, you couldn't trust people lightly. On this whole journey, the only decent ones he'd met were Yao and Luoping. Yao had only lowered her guard because of the hyena showing up. It was a twist of fate. Otherwise, one wrong move, and they could have been pointing guns at each other. As for the rest, which one didn't start a fight on sight? The apocalypse was cruel. People were no longer kind. In this world, there wasn't much goodwill to go around. And Luzin had traveled from north to south, yet hadn't met that many people. Not until Mazu City did he finally run into the first group besides himself. He knew that Yao had far more experience in this than he did. So he would definitely take her advice seriously. "Dogsy, go check. See if the water's safe." Luzin gave Dogsy the order. The mechanical dog received the new command and immediately jumped off the car, rolling forward on the wheels attached to its 4 legs, heading toward the bottled water. Yao was in charge of covering the mechanical dog, while Luzin watched Dogsy and said thoughtfully, "If they really are good people, that'd be great. If they are, we could introduce them to Luoping as teammates. That way, our Rebuilders broadcast will finally be doing some good." Yao didn't speak, just stared fixedly at the station building door. Luzin's eyes, on the other hand, stayed on Dogsy. Dogsy had already reached the bottled water and was staring intensely at the bottles with its dog eyes. Luzin knew it was scanning the water quality. Then he saw Dogsy turn around. Its eyes flashed twice in his direction. Chapter 56, Good Guys and Bad Guys. There was definitely something wrong with the water. But was the problem with the water itself and the gas station folks didn't realize it, or did they add something to it? Luzin asked Yao, "What would you have done in this situation before?" Yao shook her head. "Never encountered it. But we can just leave." "Yeah, in times like this, who'd go out of their way to give stuff to strangers?" Yao didn't have Dogsy, so she couldn't test the water quality herself. Even if someone gave her something, she wouldn't take it easily. Luzin thought for a moment and said, "Let's ask them. If it doesn't feel right, then we'll go." For some reason, he wanted to confirm whether the people inside were actually good. He felt like he was getting infected by Woking. Or maybe he just wanted to complete that Rebuilders broadcast mission? Alright. Yao didn't object. "Dogsy, come back." Luzin called the mechanical dog back, then said, "Hey, someone in there, come out and take a sip of the water first." Silence from the station building. After a while, someone finally said, "You too, that water was a gift. We've already given it to you. How could we take it back and drink it ourselves?" "It's for you, it's for you." But it wasn't that older man speaking. It was a kid. The kid's tone actually sounded surprisingly mature. Luzin frowned. Suddenly, he thought of that child who'd darted out and fallen to the ground earlier. He stared hard at the station door. "Come on, you already gave the water to me. Doesn't that make it mine now?" I'm offering it to you. What's there to feel awkward about? Another stretch of silence. A moment later, that kid's voice came again, suddenly sounding kind of furious. We already gave you the water. Why do you keep trying to make us drink it? Take it or don't. If not, just get lost. Sounded seriously flustered. That confirmed it. The people inside knew the water was tainted. So much for the rebuilder's broadcast mission. Luzin sighed. He didn't plan on getting tangled up with the people in the gas station and was ready to drive off. But just then, something caught his attention. His eyes darted toward the station window. Suddenly, a flash of light shot out. An arrow. And it was on fire. The window glass had long been broken, always letting air in. That's why Luzin and Yahweh hadn't paid much attention to it before. The shot wasn't fired from right next to the window either. It had to be a bit further back inside the room. The arrow had cloth wrapped around it, the cloth was burning, and it streaked through the air like a comet. Headed straight for the car. Its target was the car's fuel tank. They actually thought they could blow up the car with a flaming arrow? Luzin didn't know if a flaming arrow could really set off an explosion, but he wasn't about to risk it. He shouted, "Yahweh!" and jumped out of the car. Bang! Yahweh fired a shot, her muzzle aimed right at the incoming arrow. The bullet hit the arrow midair, bursting into a brilliant spark. The arrow instantly lost momentum and dropped to the ground. Luzin was slightly stunned. He turned to see Yahweh leaping out of the car window. Nice shot. He praised her, then looked toward the station entrance. Suddenly, the station door flew open and someone lunged out. Instinctively, Luzin opened fire. Bang 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 bang, 4 shots in a row. The first hit the guy, but the other 3 flew off who knows where. The bullet didn't kill him. It hit his thigh. He screamed and rolled around on the ground, wailing in pain. Bang. Yahweh fired another shot, finishing him off. Now that's the difference. Luzin couldn't help but feel a little emotional. It wasn't easy to get good at shooting. Guns seemed precise and easy to use, but to truly master them, you had to feed them bullets. Luzin didn't know how Yahweh got so good with a gun, but even after scavenging all those bullets from Mazu City's police station and using them on a bunch of enemies, he still wasn't great. Of course, he also hadn't taken the time to practice seriously. He only used bullets when he had to, never had time to focus on the details. And every time he looked back to learn from it, the gains were minimal. He really ought to get Yahweh to teach him some proper shooting skills. While he was thinking about it, Yahweh had already rushed to the station door, kicked it open, and stepped aside to clear the angle. Seeing no movement inside, she went in. Bang. Bang. 2 more gunshots rang out. Luzin headed back to the car, pulled out the keys, rolled up the windows, and locked the doors before following her in. Inside the station, 2 people were down. One was already dead. The other had a fatal shot to the chest but was still barely alive. That person raised a hand and pointed deeper inside. There. Back door. It was a small door that connected to the inner office. If what he said was true, then the back door must be in that office. Luzin and Yahweh could indeed hear footsteps and heavy breathing coming from that direction. Judging by the sound, whoever it was had already exited the station and run out through the back. But they didn't rush after them right away. First, they carefully checked the station. Meanwhile, the injured man on the floor was panicking. He yelled, "They poisoned the water to trap you and wanted to steal your car. When that failed, they tried to blow you up. That kid is our boss. He's the one who planned everything. Don't be fooled by how young he looks. He's the most twisted of us all, not afraid to risk everything. He faked that little stunt earlier on purpose, just to test you. When you didn't immediately kill him, that's when he gave you the poisoned water. He's a real piece of shit. There are others still in the city, and he'll lead them straight to you. You better kill him now." His voice was full of hatred, like he wanted to rip that runaway kid to shreds. The rage pushed his heart wound even wider. Blood sprayed everywhere. He choked, his eyes rolled back, and he was gone. Looking at the guy, Luzin figured out what had happened. Dogsy had said there were 6 people here, but Yahweh had only taken down 3. So the rest must have escaped. Most likely, those who ran had pushed these 3 out as shields, buying time for themselves to flee. That explained why this guy, used as a human shield, was so full of rage. There really are so few good people left in this world. Luzin sighed. No wonder Yahweh trusted no one, and Luoping was so grateful to have met them. Good people were rare. And it was even more dangerous being one. If they'd just attacked that kid without hesitation, they might have avoided this whole crisis. So the fact he'd met both Yahweh and Luoping in such a short time. That was some seriously good luck. Luzin and Yahweh gave chase, heading through the small door into the office. Sure enough, the back door was open, letting the wind blow in. They continued through it. The rear door opened into a straight corridor leading to a distant road. In the light, Luzin saw two strong men already running far ahead. One was carrying a bow, the other had a big machete. And on his shoulder was a kid. Who else could it be but the same boy who'd darted out of the station earlier? Chapter 57, Clumsy but effective. Luzin couldn't understand how, in this day and age, an ordinary person could be so physically strong. But that wasn't the point. The point was that those two brutes carrying the kid were almost at the end of the corridor. Once they turned the corner, it would be a pain to catch up again. Yahweh! Luzin quickly called out. Bang! Bang! 2 gunshots. Yahweh's bullets were like flying daggers. Dead accurate. The 2 men were taken down instantly, their bodies toppling forward, and the kid on one of their shoulders tumbled off. Amazing. Luzin praised her and asked, how did you get that good at shooting? He genuinely wanted to learn from her. Didn't train. Just used it a lot. Yahweh replied. She basically meant she learned entirely through combat. Luzin could understand that. But what he didn't get was, he'd been in plenty of real fights too. Back at Mazu City Police Station, he'd gone through a ton of bullets. Just now, he wasted another 4 rounds, and still, his shooting hadn't improved much at all. The kid who'd fallen to the ground was completely dazed from the tumble, unable to get up right away. Luzin and Yahweh quickly closed in. As they caught up, Luzin asked again, so how do you make it count? I've been firing too, and it doesn't seem to help. Yahweh glanced at the submachine gun in Luzin's hands and said, cherish every bullet. Luzin. That look definitely had a hint of disdain. Luzin was sure he wasn't imagining it. This woman was judging him for wasting ammo. Like I wanted to waste it? Luzin grumbled inwardly. Cherishing bullets takes confidence. You have to survive first before you can worry about saving bullets. If you die with bullets still in the mag, isn't that the worst kind of tragedy? The submachine gun had a switch for burst and single-shot mode, but Luzin didn't dare use single-shot. He was afraid that would lead him straight into life's greatest tragedy. Not that he could explain all this to Yahweh. She seemed perfectly capable of preserving both bullets and her own life. Definitely a natural talent. Geniuses don't understand us mortals. They caught up to the 3. One of the brutes was already dead, the other still had a bit of breath left. Yahweh pulled a knife from her waist, but before she could finish him off, Luzin quickly asked, how are you guys so strong? But the brute didn't answer. He just grunted and looked over at the kid who had just staggered to his feet. To stop the kid from running, Luzin kept questioning as he moved to twist the kid's arms behind his back and restrained him. The kid trembled and whined, Uncle. Auntie. Kill him quick. They always took the food first, and we only got leftovers after they were full. They're scary strong. You. The brute's eyes turned red with rage, his face twisted as he tried to force himself up and lunge at the kid. The kid panicked, scooting back frantically and kicking at the ground. Yahweh moved to finish the brute off, but Luzin said, leave him breathing. So she withdrew the knife, bent her knees, and pinned the brute down with 1 foot. Compared to the big guy, built like a general straight out of a temple mural, Yahweh was practically petite. Yet under her foot, the brute couldn't move an inch. The power difference between new humans and ordinary people was truly terrifying. Luzin himself wasn't any less terrifying. He picked up the kid like a baby chick and handed him to Yahweh. Take him to the car. I'll ask this guy a few things. All right. Yahweh figured Luzin wanted to separate the two for questioning, so she took the kid and headed back. After the handoff, Luzin stepped on the brute to keep him in place. The kid looked a little flustered as Yahweh carried him off. He quickly said, Uncle, Andy, don't ask him anything. He'll mislead you. He and Liang San are both awful. They tricked a Type A new human who came to get gas. Got him to drink poisoned water, killed him, and stole his stuff. When they shot arrows at you earlier, the cloth on them was soaked in fuel from that guy's gas can. They're the worst ones here. Just now they even threw me out to test you and gave you poisoned water. He's definitely going to lie to you. The brute under Luzin's foot looked like he was about to explode, veins bulging from his neck. He strained to lift his head. Just in time to see Yahweh slap the kid across the face. Blood ran from the boy's lip as he finally shut up. The brute seemed satisfied and dropped his head back down. Luzin had been watching both the brute and the kid. Once Yahweh dragged the boy back into the gas station building, he crouched down, pointed to the now dead brute nearby, and asked the still breathing one, that's Liang San, right? What about you? Liang Si. The brute grunted in reply. Luzin raised a brow and casually asked, what about Liang Di and Liang Dead. Not surprising. Survival was hard in this world. Luzin asked, that kid? What's his deal? He's the boss, the brute replied. We all follow him. Luzin looked at the brute's round, muscular belly and asked, I don't get it. You're huge. How do you take orders from a little kid? The brute replied, because he's ruthless. Willing to die if it gets him what he wants. No matter the situation, he is always cold-blooded. Traps, tricks, threats, manipulation. He always finds a way to get people to obey. Me and Liang San got this strong because of the rules he set up. Any food we got was given to us first. He even put himself third on the list voluntarily. Luzin said, doesn't show. That kid's been pretty sloppy this whole time. His lies are full of holes. How does someone like that get people to fall in line? The brute grunted again. You think it's sloppy. But it works. Luzin carefully studied the brute's tone and expression. It sounded unbelievable, but the guy didn't seem to be lying. He didn't bother pushing further on that. Instead, he asked, in this city, besides your group of 6, is there anyone else? The brute didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, what are you planning to do with Fazai? That kid you're talking about? Luzin answered truthfully, neither of you is making it out alive. Good. The brute clearly had no hopes of surviving and seemed relieved by Luzin's reply. There's a group of 4 at the South Street supermarket. Their boss is a woman. Her man was here, and you just killed him. 7 people at Tongzhi Hotel in North Street. Another 5 at the Plaza apartment complex. The boss's dads were here too, and you killed them as well. Chapter 58, a crude kind of viciousness and cunning. So, those 3 people just now, were they hostages that Fazai brought in? Luzin asked. From the way Liang Si talked, Luzin confirmed that Fazai was the kid's name. Yes. Liang Si said, but they're also sort of collaborators. After Fazai killed the previous leader here, Duan Nan, he basically scared everyone else into submission and became the new leader. He took control with a group of people and started attacking and driving out those who didn't obey. Eventually, he took over all of Tongzhou County. But later, he felt like there were too many people around him, and distributing supplies was becoming a hassle. So he split everyone up and had those 3 groups each manage a separate area. Every few days, he goes around to check in on the other areas and strictly forbids any communication between the 3 groups. He took 1 person from each area to act as a liaison. And also a hostage. He has a gun, but ever since he killed Duan Nan, he hasn't used it on outsiders. It's only for self-defense or for dealing with his own people when they disobey. Just as he finished speaking, Luzin heard a bang. The sound was slightly different from Yao Wei's handgun, and it instantly made Luzin think of what Liang Si had just said. He jumped in surprise. Thankfully, a scream followed from the distance. It was Fazai's voice. Looks like even if Fazai fired, he didn't manage to hurt Yao Wei. Luzin let out a long breath and said, why didn't you say so earlier? Liang Si's face went pale and said, I only just remembered. Fazai hasn't used a gun in a long time. Nowadays, if someone needs to be punished, he just has us hold them down and he cuts them up himself, 1 slice at a time. Luzin said, you 2 tools really played your parts well. Liang Si muttered, he set new rules. We followed him, and the rules were all for benefits. We weren't losing out. Well, at least you get it. Luzin said, then asked again, anything else? Besides the people you mentioned, is there anyone else here? Liang Si said, no, it's too barren outside Tongzhou County. Even if people didn't die, if they were kicked out, they probably couldn't survive. All right. Luzin nodded, then pulled out his small knife from his sleeve and ended Liang Si's life. After a kill comes looting. Luzin wiped the blade on Liang Si to clean off the blood, then put the knife away and began searching both Liang Si and Liang San. Inside Liang Si's sleeve was a round, heavy pipe over a meter long, rough to the touch and hollow inside. Looked like a radiator pipe. Because of the pipe, the arm he threw to the ground couldn't bend, but since there wasn't time, he hadn't managed to take it out or use it. Liang San had a bow and a basket of arrows. The bow was a simple longbow. When Liang San fell, he landed on the bow. With his weight, he actually snapped it. But Luzin didn't care. Yao Wei had an American hunting bow anyway, so even without Liang San's bow, the arrows they just gained would still be useful. Luzin picked up the basket and counted. 11 arrows in total, even more than Yao Wei had. Now Yao Wei didn't need to worry as much about running out of arrows. Luzin slung the quiver over his back, picked up the radiator pipe, and after checking 1 more time to confirm there was nothing else useful on Liang San or Liang Si, returned to the gas station building. Yao Wei hadn't gone back to the car. She was waiting inside the station building. When Luzin walked in, he saw that Yao Wei had already broken both of Fazai's arms. And both legs too. Her methods were rough, and the kid's limbs were already swollen and even leaking blood. Yao Wei held him up in one hand, his limbs dangled and shook, and he trembled all over, groaning non-stop. But Luzin only glanced at him once before turning to Yao Wei and asking, "You okay?" "I'm fine." Yao Wei had a new gun in hand. It must have been the one she took from Fa's eye. She looked calm, shook her head, and said, "I was trying to ask him about what's going on here. I didn't restrain him too tightly, and he pulled a gun from his coat to try and shoot me. He failed." Luzin glanced at Fa's eye again. From what Liang San said earlier, he already figured this kid wasn't worth any sympathy. Now, hearing that he even tried to ambush Yao Wei, he felt even more like the kid had it coming. Luzin asked, "What did he say to you?" Yao Wei said, "Same stuff as before. Told us not to believe those two guys, said they still had 3 teams in Tongzhou County and that we should be careful and get out fast." Sounds almost sincere. Luzin chuckled. But Fa's eye, still trembling in pain, forced himself to speak, I'm telling the truth. You better run. If those 2 men get here, you're screwed. Ugh. You can spare me. I'm the one those 2 usually use to pass messages, so everyone knows me. If we run into their people. Hey. I can cover for you." Because of the pain, his lips quivered as he spoke, and his voice trembled. He groaned in agony from time to time. "Is that so?" Luzin asked, "And why should I believe you?" Fa's eye shivered and forced a harmless-looking smile. "Uncle, Auntie, I'm just a little kid. Why wouldn't you trust me?" "Ah. Otherwise, they wouldn't have picked me to be the liaison." The way he said it, like he hadn't just tried to pull a gun and shoot them. Full of lies. He looked like an innocent kid, but not a single word out of his mouth was trustworthy. From Fa's eye's behavior, Luzin confirmed that what Liang Si said was true. So he drove the knife straight into Fa's eye's neck. Fa's eyes went wide with disbelief, then his gaze quickly dimmed. Luzin pulled the knife out, and Yao Wei let go of Fa's eye. This kid was really cunning and vicious. And dumb too. Luzin sighed. He couldn't quite get it. This kid's lies were full of holes, his actions completely inconsistent. How did someone with this kind of crude cunning and meanness manage to rule a whole area? Yao Wei didn't say anything. She didn't seem surprised. In the apocalypse, she'd probably seen plenty of people like him and things like this. Luzin said, "Let's search this place quickly and get out." If Liang Si wasn't lying, there are still 3 other groups in this city who are working with Fa's eye. With all the gunfire just now, they might have heard something and could be heading here. Yao Wei nodded and said, "Okay." Then she and Luzin quickly searched the place, grabbed some loot, and returned to the car. Chapter 59, Those Leaving and Those Heading Out. Luzin and Yao Wei didn't get much from their search. The 3 people who died in the station building had nothing on them except their clothes. It seemed that Fa's eye really just treated them as liaisons and hostages, not allowing them to keep anything valuable. Apart from that, there was Fa's eye's lighter, a pile of firewood in the corner, wild dog corpses that had been dried out with blood but not yet properly dealt with, and a metal barrel containing almost half a tank of gasoline. When Luzin and Yao Wei first entered Tongzhou County, they had heard the sounds of hunting, and the prey had been a dog. At that time, for safety's sake, they had avoided the hunters. Now it seemed those hunters were the ones inside this gas station. One of them should have been Liang Si, but the other was unknown. Anyway, no matter who it was, Luzin was sure it wasn't Liang San. Before their betrayal, Liang San and Liang Si were Fa's eye's muscle, and Luzin didn't think Fa's eye would send both of them out hunting. The kid would have at least left one of them behind. There seemed to have been a voice that sounded a bit old. Was it the guy in the station building? Luzin glanced at the one who had died. Who had come out earlier to bring Fa's eye back. And had a judgment in his mind. As for the metal barrel, it was probably what Liang Si had mentioned. The one left behind by the new human who had been sabotaged after fueling. This suggested that the new human had indeed fueled the tank inside the gas station, meaning there should be something else here. Dog. Luzin called the mechanical dog to help search. But after turning around, the dog couldn't find anything. Just when Luzin was about to give up and walk out of the station building with Yao Wei, the dog's eyes suddenly lit up, and it moved towards the corner. That corner was the station's bathroom, an open-air latrine with a stench so foul. Luzin and Yao Wei held their breaths as they approached the door, and upon looking inside, the pit was already overflowing with cracked and dried-up filth, making it impossible to step inside. Outside the pit, a skeleton was scattered around, arms not in their proper places, legs misplaced. Luzin could even see bite marks on the bones. He could imagine what had happened here, but didn't want to think too much about it. Next to the skeleton, Luzin finally found what he had been searching for. It was an electronic device that had long been shattered to pieces. Broken plastic shells and scattered wires were everywhere. Despite the damage, Luzin could tell that it was something similar to the power bank Yao Wei had. It seemed the group hadn't been able to obtain this treasure from the victimized new human. He wondered if that new human had destroyed the power bank, preferring to shatter it rather than let it fall into their hands. But if they were going to smash the power bank, why not smash the gasoline barrel as well? And why was this item, like the skeleton, left in the bathroom? It didn't make sense. The events of the past couldn't be replayed, and it had become a mystery. Since the power bank was already broken, and his curiosity about scavenging had disappeared, Luzin couldn't be bothered to investigate this pointless past. He simply said, "Let's go," and left with Yahweh. "How do we leave?" After loading the dog meat into the car and sitting down, Yahweh asked Luzin. Luzin said, "When I asked Liang Si. He's the one who was still breathing earlier. He told me that Fazai has 3 groups of accomplices, one at the South Street supermarket, one at the North Street Tongzi Hotel, and one at the Plaza apartment complex. We should avoid these 3 places as much as possible and try not to encounter them. Let's find a road and leave Tongzu County. Can you check the map and see if these places are marked?" Yahweh obediently took out the World Atlas Volume 1 and looked. After opening the page for Tongzu County, she said, "The supermarket's not there, but the Plaza apartment complex and Tongzu Hotel are. The Plaza apartment complex is to the east. We can turn around here, go through an intersection, and take the first left. The Tongzu Hotel is on the road we came from, just keep going north." After hearing Yahweh, Luzin immediately started the car, pressed the accelerator, and headed west along the current road. He said, "In that case, if we go west along this road, we'll most likely just run into people from the Tongzu Hotel. Or maybe we're far enough from the hotel that they won't hear the gunfire, and we won't encounter anyone. Best case scenario. Just to be safe, though, let's retrace our steps and go back to the other gas station, then leave the city. That way, we can avoid any roadblocks or ambushes." Actually, he didn't think there was much risk in Tongzu County. The people here were far weaker than those in Yubai City. They had no cars, no guns. Just a kid with reckless aggression and cunning. He'd managed to take control of this place. Luzin felt that he and Yahweh could easily achieve the same here, just like Luoping had in Fengcheng County. But there was no need for that. They had enough supplies, and the car was already topped off with gas. It was a waste of time and energy to take risks with these people. And if things turned bad, they might have to waste bullets on them, which would be even more of a hassle. Looking at Yahweh, Luzin realized that if she hadn't found more bullets on Fazai, she probably would have been heartbroken. Yahweh responded but kept her eyes fixed on the window, remaining alert. Even lions use their full strength to hunt rabbits, as the saying goes, and Yahweh was just like that. Earlier, she had loosened her grip on Fazai to ask him questions, but when he attacked, she immediately broke his arms and legs without hesitation. She must have already assessed the current situation in the city's power balance, but she wouldn't relax her guard. Luzin felt that perhaps his own vigilance had been influenced by Yahweh. When they reached the intersection where they had turned earlier, both Luzin and Yahweh suddenly heard something. As indicated on the map, the noise was coming from the direction of the Tongzu Hotel. Yahweh pointed her gun toward the sound, and sure enough, a figure quickly darted to the side and hid. In the blink of an eye, Luzin turned the steering wheel south and gave those people a car's backside. When the car was far enough away, 7 people finally emerged from the north side of the intersection. They all hid behind nearby houses, their faces filthy and their bodies thin and frail. Definitely no match for Liang San or Liang Si. I knew it. The gunshot just now was definitely from the people in the car. Yeah, you have good ears. None of us heard it, but you did. Do you think Fazai was shot dead by that person? Don't know. Better if he's dead. That bastard is the worst in all of Tongzu. Alright, enough talk, let's go. If Fazai is really dead, we'll be in for a good time. Hope the driver leaves us something. They're the ones who got their food today, they don't need us to supply them, right? Liang San's got a bow and arrows, we'll be able to get some good stuff. If they didn't leave anything, it's fine. They've got cars and guns now. Don't think they'll still be interested in human flesh. Just leave Fazai and the others for us. Move, don't let the supermarket or apartment complex people beat us to it. Chapter 60. Everything Luzin does is right. The west side of Tongzu County had nearly the same scenery as the east side. After Luzin and Yahweh left Tongzu County, they drove along the road, and before nightfall, they finally encountered a river. A narrow stream less than a meter wide, flowing gently. When they got out of the car to refill their water, Yahweh stared at the stream for a long time before reluctantly pulling her gaze away with some disappointment. What's wrong? Luzin asked. No shrimp. Yahweh replied, her tone somewhat melancholic. Luzin could tell that the woman was still reminiscing about the stir-fried shrimp they had outside Jiang District. He couldn't help but laugh and said, we have fish and meat now, why are you still thinking about shrimp? But I want to eat it. Yao Wei answered. She was straightforward, saying exactly what she felt. That stir-fried shrimp was served with rice, though a bit dry and had to be eaten with water. It left a good impression on Yao Wei, making her want to experience it again. Lu Xun said, "We'll have it next time when we get the chance. We're heading south now, and the weather should get better, right? We should encounter plenty of shrimp along the way." Yao Wei nodded. Lu Xun made that remark based on his experience moving from north to south. He guessed that the weather conditions would improve, which would lead to more shrimp encounters. But Yao Wei had actually been to the south before, so she still remembered places further south. "So what are we having for dinner?" After putting the refilled bottle of mineral water back in the car, Lu Xun pointed at the fish and the dog carcass in the pot. "Fish or dog meat?" Yao Wei glanced at the fish in the pot, then at the dog meat, unable to decide. Lu Xun thought for a moment and said, "Let's eat the fish first. The new environment here is pretty good for making jerky. We can process the dog meat together and see if we can make it. That way, we can store the meat for a while and not have to eat it all at once." "All right." Yao Wei nodded, thinking to herself that this kind of thing really depended on Lu Xun. He always knew things she didn't, and offered different suggestions. However, Lu Xun immediately added, "But just so you know, I don't know the exact steps for making jerky. I'll try my best, but if it doesn't turn out well, don't blame me." "I won't blame you." Yao Wei smiled lightly. She felt that Lu Xun's disclaimer was unnecessary. She had encountered situations where food reserves were lost due to unsuitable conditions, and that was normal. She wouldn't blame anyone. But for some reason, hearing him say that made her want to smile. "Then you handle the fish, and I'll handle the dog meat." Lu Xun then assigned them their tasks, and they got busy. Yao Wei took the fish out of the pot, scraped off the scales, cleaned out the innards, and removed the gills, then set it up to roast over the fire. This was the one thing she was good at. Along their journey, whenever they had meat, it was always roasted, which is why she was so nostalgic about Lu Xun's stir-fried shrimp. That was the first stir-fry she had ever eaten. In fact, when she first started roasting fish, she didn't know to remove the gills, and the fish meat always had a bitter taste. It wasn't until after a few attempts that she figured out that step. Meanwhile, Lu Xun grabbed a knife and struggled to peel off the skin and clean the dog meat, cutting it into long strips, removing the connective tissue, and washing it with stream water. He only remembered that the jerky he had eaten in his past life was made from long strips of meat, so without experience, he tried to replicate that shape based on memory. His plan was to try his best. If it worked out, it would be stored as preserved food; if not, they could just roast or cook it in the next couple of days. Either way, nothing should go to waste. "Here, salt." Lu Xun handed the salt to Yao Wei. This salt was from the shelter at Dan village. At that time, Lu Xun's small bag of salt had run out, so he opened a new one. The taste seemed much better than the salt he found elsewhere. They hadn't used much of the new salt, and, of course, they didn't want to waste any, so they took it with them when they left. A bag of salt didn't take up much space, so they took 5 full bags and 1 half-opened bag with them when they left. The supplies were plentiful, so they didn't need to be too frugal. However, Yao Wei was accustomed to saving, so she applied just a little salt on the fish while roasting it. Relative to her, Lu Xun used more. Once Yao Wei was done, Lu Xun rubbed the salt evenly on the dog meat strips, massaging them as part of the curing process, then hung them on the car's iron window mesh. Yao Wei looked at his actions with some confusion but didn't ask. She thought to herself, Lu Xun knew so much, so whatever he did must be right. But Lu Xun explained to her, "The wind in this new place is strong. Tonight, I'll try if I can air dry it naturally." Without professional knowledge, Lu Xun could only rely on these makeshift ideas. Yao Wei nodded. Although she was a little concerned that the salted meat might attract mosquitoes, she still firmly trusted Lu Xun. "Do you think Tongzhou County is doing now?" While hanging the meat, Lu Xun asked. Yao Wei thought for a moment and said, "It should be fighting by now." "Really?" Lu Xun glanced towards Tongzhou County. They had gone so far that the abandoned city was no longer visible in their sight. He didn't pursue the topic and merely said it casually. Aside from the arrows, dog meat, and the refueled gasoline, that place was no longer relevant to them. "All right." After a while, Yao Wei finished roasting the fish and handed Lu Xun a portion. Lu Xun also hung the meat strips on the back seat and the iron window mesh behind the car. Even the door handles and the travel rack on top of the car were filled with meat. From a distance, the car looked very unusual, as if it had come out of some eerie movie. He took the roasted fish from Yao Wei and asked, "Do you think we'll be able to make jerky out of this?" Yao Wei replied confidently, "Yes." Lu Xun. This woman was even more confident than he was. They extinguished the fire, put the remaining firewood back in the car, and then sat quietly by the stream, eating the roasted fish. The taste of this fish was definitely better than the last time they roasted pork. After all, they had plenty of salt in storage, and even though Yao was frugal, she used more than when they roasted the pork. Luzin carefully tasted the fish, picking out the bones, and smiled. It's really delicious. Yao quietly ate her fish, murmuring a soft but inside, she felt inexplicably happy. The sky had already darkened, and the night in this new place felt different from elsewhere. The sky was exceptionally deep, making the starlight seem to have a strong sense of depth. They sat under the night sky, eating their roasted fish, anticipating another harvest the next day. A harvest related to making jerky. Chapter 61, Inuit New Humans. However, just as they were about to sleep, the cold air suddenly arrived. This time, the interval between the two cold waves in Mengson City was so short that they only managed to go to Tongzu County, have dinner, and the extreme cold hit once again. Dog, go connect the power to the air conditioner. As Luzin spoke, he threw off the blanket and was about to crawl into the backseat. But Yao said, I'll do it. She quickly got to the back, waiting for the dog to dart over, open the back outlet cover, and plug in the air conditioner. The vent cover on the air conditioner automatically opened, but it would still take a little while for it to warm up. Luzin tightened his blanket and wrapped himself up tightly, but saw Yao return from the backseat and not immediately cover herself with the blanket. Instead, she stared out the window and furrowed her brows. Should we bring the meat inside? Yao asked with some concern. She was clearly worried about the supplies. Luzin thought for a moment and said, no need. Dried meat might turn into frozen jerky, that's fine. If we bring it inside with the air conditioning running, it might actually spoil. Upon hearing this, Yao relaxed and nodded. However, she didn't know that Luzin was also just guessing based on his thoughts. He didn't have any experience making dried meat or frozen jerky. He could only try his best with the resources and things he had seen in the past. After all, with the air conditioner on, it was indeed easier for the meat to spoil inside the car rather than outside. This part, Luzin was sure of. The car slowly started to warm up, so Luzin didn't need to keep himself wrapped up so tightly. He relaxed a bit and said, let's sleep. Yao covered herself with the blanket, but still occasionally glanced out the window. The supplies weighed on her mind, and those meat strips, frozen and dehydrated in the cold wind, kept pulling her attention. Luzin had to persuade her. Stop looking. It's time to sleep. If you don't rest your mind, it's also a waste of energy. Yao blinked, looking at Luzin. Under the starlight, her eyes were slightly brighter, and she looked especially beautiful. What are you looking at? Luzin asked. Nothing. Yao shook her head and said, what you said makes sense. She seemed to truly think Luzin's words made sense. After saying this, she closed her eyes and fell asleep. Luzin fell silent for a moment before also closing his eyes. It seemed like what he said really did make sense. Well, since it made sense, then let's sleep. Bang, 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 bang. Something was tapping on the car window, and it wasn't just one thing. Luzin and Yao opened their eyes and noticed that the sky was gradually getting brighter. The first light of dawn from the east had scattered the starlight in the sky. The meat strips hanging on the car window had somehow frozen solid during the night. Now, with the morning breeze, they were tapping against the iron mesh of the window with a bang, bang, bang sound. It seems like it's frozen. Luzin exclaimed in surprise. The extreme cold of the night had squeezed out the moisture from the meat, making the originally plump meat strips shrink and wrinkle. The water that had leaked out from the meat had formed a layer of ice on the surface, looking somewhat crystalline. It should be fine to eat. Luzin looked at the meat strips carefully, making his judgment in his heart. However, he didn't just want to rely on his eyes. If they were going to eat it, he needed the dog to take a look too. Should we bring it in? Yao asked. She was still concerned about this, always thinking it would be safer to bring it inside than leave it outside. But Luzin shook his head and said, let it hang outside for now. The car's too warm inside. Though the meat strips appeared to be dehydrated and wrinkled, which seemed fine, Luzin wasn't entirely sure. He was afraid that if he brought them inside and they thawed, they would quickly spoil. It was still better to leave them outside. Once the weather warmed up, they'd keep driving, and the wind would help dry them again. Though she was habitually uneasy, Yao still chose to trust Luzin. Luzin thought for a moment, then opened the car door, bringing in the nearest strip of jerky. After being frozen and dehydrated by the extreme cold, this jerky should be fine to eat directly. Luzin suddenly felt like trying it out, since they hadn't had breakfast yet. Why not try the jerky? The biting cold wind rushed into the car, instantly driving away the warmth from the air conditioner. But fortunately, both Luzin and Yao had become used to the cold in this world, so it wasn't much of an issue for them. What was harder to deal with was the task of removing the jerky. Luzin had hung the meat on the iron mesh yesterday, and now, with it frozen and dried, the openings where the mesh and jerky connected made it hard for him to pull without risking tearing the mesh. He needed to use some finesse, which required extra effort. For a new human who was used to relying on brute force, this was indeed not easy. You pick another strip. We'll disconnect the power to the air conditioner later and let the dog check it. If it's fine, we can have jerky for breakfast. I'll also get to test my results. Luzin reminded her, be careful when removing the jerky. Don't pull the iron mesh off. Okay. Yao agreed, opening the passenger side door, following Luzin's lead, and reached out to grab the nearest strip of jerky. The wind in the car turned into a draft in an instant, and it was so cold that both of them had to wrap themselves in their blankets again, continuing their work. After retrieving the jerky, they quickly closed the car door. After a short pause, the chill began to fade. Luzin couldn't help but smile. He sighed, with the air conditioner, I've gotten so used to warmth. It's a bit hard to get used to the cold again. It's true what they say, it's easy to go from frugality to luxury, but hard to go from luxury to frugality. Yao nodded in agreement. Yeah. They smiled at each other, both thinking that this was just fine. Next, they proceeded to the next step. Luzin unplugged the air conditioner and ordered the dog, check if this meat is safe to eat. The dog's eyes immediately lit up, scanning the jerky Luzin had laid out. After scanning, the dog's eyes brightened, and both Luzin and Yao confirmed that the meat was fine. Luzin quickly plugged the air conditioner back in, and the dog immediately transformed back into a power bank. The warmth returned to the car. Luzin and Yao sat back in the front seats, each taking a strip of frozen jerky. The jerky felt ice cold and hard in their hands. Luzin thought for a moment and said, why don't you put the jerky under the air conditioner's vent to warm it up before eating? And you? Yao asked. She could tell that Luzin didn't seem to plan on eating it that way. Luzin smiled and said, I'm going to try the Inuit way of eating. He said this as he stuffed the jerky into his mouth. It was indeed hard as a rock, and biting into it was difficult. He took out a knife, pressed it against the jerky, and sliced through it. After cutting it into smaller pieces, he popped a chunk into his mouth, finding it much easier to chew. Well, now he truly was an Inuit. Inuit knew humans. Chapter 62, based on feeling. Speaking of which, the dried frozen meat made here is definitely different from the one in the past world, both in texture and taste. It's a huge difference. But anyway, the fact that it can be made, and after the dog tested it, it's still edible, is already pretty good. For ordinary people, this might not be something they could eat, but in the past world, he definitely wouldn't have eaten it. But now, he is a new human, still in the desolate wasteland world, so it's no problem at all. Luzin chewed on the dried frozen meat and felt pretty good, full of a sense of accomplishment. Luzin was just trying it out, but when Yao saw him doing this, she actually followed suit. However, she didn't just stuff the meat strips into her mouth, instead, she first cut off a small piece with a knife, then put it into her mouth. Is it good? Luzin asked. Yao replied, it's edible. Luzin smiled, it's actually pretty decent, much better than some soggy instant noodles. Sometimes, when finding unopened packs of instant noodles, the noodle cakes are still a bit damp, so when you chew, it's not crispy, and the taste is affected as well. If it weren't for letting dog check it first and confirm it was still edible, Luzin wouldn't have dared to eat those instant noodles. The dried frozen meat cut into chunks is really tough and still cold, frozen so that it feels cold in the mouth, and biting it is a bit of a struggle. But still, it has its own special flavor, much better than that kind of instant noodles. And when Yao heard what Luzin said, she nodded and said, and it's salty, better than unsalted roasted meat. Both of them thought it was pretty good, so they smiled at each other. Luzin said, now we're both like Inuit. What? Yao asked. Luzin explained, they were people who used to live in the ice and snow. They would cut ice blocks to make ice houses and dig ice holes to fish for seals. When they caught seals, they'd process them and bury them in the snow to freeze. When they wanted to eat, they'd take it out and cut it with a knife. Yao, imagining the life of the Inuit as Luzin spoke, couldn't help but praise, that's impressive. Yeah, really impressive. Luzin also praised. For the two of them, a row of dried frozen meat was just too little, it wasn't enough for them to eat. So after confirming that it was really fine, they went outside the car and each brought back 2 more rows of dried frozen meat. They placed the meat strips, waiting to be eaten, near the air conditioner's vent, so the hot air from the AC could thaw the meat faster. This way, when they ate the meat later, it was much easier to chew, and it wasn't so cold anymore, so they didn't need to strain their teeth too much. They deliberately slowed down their eating to let the meat thaw more. Although the weather was cold, it wasn't snowing. After finishing their breakfast of dog meat strips, they continued on their journey. As for the dried meat hanging outside the car, there was no need to worry at all. With the weather being so cold, no animals would come out to launch a surprise attack on the food outside the car. Luzin suddenly felt a bit lucky. Yesterday, when they hung the meat strips outside the car, he hadn't thought of this point. Fortunately, the cold wave arrived and made all the animals hide. Otherwise, he wasn't sure if the meat hanging outside the car would attract mosquitoes, birds, or beasts. In that case, when they woke up this morning, there probably wouldn't be much left of the dog meat strips outside. Even if some was left, it would probably be ruined by mosquitoes and flies, making it inedible. In that case, he really didn't know how Yahweh would feel. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Luzin let out a sigh of relief and also reminded himself to stay alert in the future. He should never make such mistakes again. Whatever he did, he should think carefully and avoid all unforeseen negative consequences. Driving west, Luzin was still in the driver's seat, pressing the gas pedal and holding the steering wheel. Unknowingly, he had already become the permanent driver of the car. It couldn't be helped, after all, his shooting skills weren't great. Compared to him, Yahweh was much better at keeping watch in the front passenger seat. While driving, he asked Yahweh for some tips on shooting skills, and Yahweh was racking her brain, feeling a headache. How do I shoot accurately? Feel it out. How do I feel it out? I don't feel accurate. Focus on the feeling. Don't shoot randomly. Wait until you get the feeling right, then shoot. By the time I'm ready to shoot, I'll probably already be dead. When you shoot, where do you aim? Vital spots. No, I mean, when you aim for the vital spots, where exactly do you aim? Just at the vital spots. Don't bullets fly? Don't guns have recoil? This isn't a game where you aim and shoot. Some games even require you to calculate the distance and wind direction before shooting. Yahweh didn't know what kind of game Luzin was talking about, but she understood the part about wind direction and distance. But when she shot, she really didn't care about that, just shooting based on feeling. She had to review her past shots, thinking for a long time before finally finding some subconscious experience and memories. Maybe you should aim a little lower. Lower than the vital spot? Yeah. How much lower? I don't know. If it's close, just a little lower. If it's far, a bit lower. What about left and right? This is a stationary target, but for moving targets, do we need to anticipate and adjust for the distance? Probably, yeah. How do you judge? Based on feeling. Luzin felt like he understood a bit, and thought his shooting skills might improve, but also felt that his feeling was probably wrong. Improving shooting skills wasn't that easy, was it? Yahweh did mention some shooting tips, like aiming the gun a little lower, but the focus in her words was still on feeling. How was he supposed to learn from this? Forget it, better rely on Yahweh. With a sharpshooter by his side, why bother getting stuck on this? Maybe one day when he was lucky enough to scavenge a whole warehouse of bullets and not have to worry about wasting them, he could practice properly. And when Yahweh saw that Luzin finally stopped asking questions, she breathed a sigh of relief. She was a little scared of Luzin's questions because she really didn't know how to answer them. Desperately wanting to distract both of them, she thought for a moment and then took out the radio they had found in the cave shelter. To avoid battery leakage or other issues from long-term disuse, the radio's batteries had been removed. Yahweh reinstalled the batteries and turned on the switch. The knob on the radio hadn't been touched and was still tuned to the same channel as before. After she turned on the switch, the zzz sound of static came from the speaker. Unexpectedly, after all the time they spent searching for a signal at the edge of Mengxin City, now, as they drove here, they could catch a signal again. Zzz. Here. Zzz. National Emergency Relief Command Center. Zzz. National Emergency Relief Command Center, we. Zzz. Please. Chapter 63, I will help you Zzz. Please all units. Zzz. Energy, make sure to. Zzz. Operate normally, reasonable distribution. Zzz. Civilian. Zzz. The signal was weak and fluctuating, never quite stable, but both Luzin and Yahweh could still make out that the content of the broadcast was the same as before. This meant that the National Emergency Relief Command Center, built in the new district of Donghai City, had been broadcasting this same message continuously. But how many people had actually heard this broadcast? Luzin suddenly thought of something and asked, the broadcast has been going on, which means the signal is still being maintained, at least the power supply for the broadcast tower is still intact. Do you think it could still be operating normally? Yahweh answered, I don't know. Zzz. Water and power. Zzz. Still intact. Zzz. Sufficient, receive. Zzz. People coming from all over. Zzz. The broadcast tower was still emitting sound. Luzin said, if it is still running, then this must truly be an oasis. Yao Wei nodded but didn't speak. But both of them found it hard to believe. In this post-apocalyptic world, they had traveled far and wide and seen many of the people struggling to survive. But all those roads and people painted a picture of civilization in decline, with barbarism running rampant across the wasteland. To think that in such a world, a real oasis could exist, in the southeastern part of the continent, was almost unimaginable. Lu Xun thought for a moment and said, I think either it's a trap, or what? Yao Wei waited a moment, and when Lu Xun didn't answer, she couldn't help but ask. She noticed that Lu Xun glanced at the rearview mirror, so she also turned to look back. But with all the supplies and the air conditioner and dog behind them, she couldn't tell what Lu Xun was looking at. Fortunately, Lu Xun spoke up again. Or maybe there's something like dog at a radio station that can continuously supply energy. Yao Wei's eyes lit up. She had always been envious of Lu Xun's dog, and if they could have another one, that would be wonderful. Why another one? Are we going to go there? She asked. If we have the chance, we should visit. Lu Xun thought for a moment and said, I was worried before that it might be a nuclear power plant. If it's been abandoned and left unmaintained for a long time, there could be radiation leaks or something like that. But the fact that the broadcast is still running makes me feel like that's unlikely. This broadcast is obviously pre-recorded and just playing on repeat. This shows that the radio station still has power and is functioning normally. But it's been playing for so long, and the content is completely meaningless now. The place is probably no longer maintained. Thinking about it this way, I feel like the idea of it being a nuclear power plant might not be as reasonable as it having something like dog that provides power. If they do have dog there, it would definitely be worth checking out. And they set up a base there before. Regardless of whether it's still there, it's worth exploring. We'll be careful when we go, and first, let dog send out a drone to check the situation. Yao Wei nodded after hearing Lu Xun's words and said, okay. But after saying okay, she turned to the first page of the World Atlas, staring at the overall map in silence. Lu Xun glanced at her and asked, what's wrong? Yao Wei pointed to the map, but since Lu Xun was concentrating on driving, he could only glance at where Yao Wei was pointing. He couldn't make out exactly what she was pointing to. What's there? Lu Xun could only guess that Yao Wei was pointing to a place that had caught her attention, so he asked. Yao Wei said, here, it's pretty close to Donghai City. The people who killed my mom were here. Lu Xun then carefully looked at the map. He first glanced at the road ahead, confirming that the road was straight and free of intersections, then he felt safe enough to turn his head and look at the map. The location Yao Wei pointed to was in the northeastern part of Donghai City's new district. It was indeed quite close. On the map, it almost seemed to touch. Based on the scale of the World Atlas, Lu Xun felt that the distance between the two places was probably only about half a day's drive. What kind of people were there? Lu Xun asked. Yao Wei shook her head and said, I don't know. I was still young back then. I only know there were a lot of them, 2 new humans, and many ordinary people. The new humans injured my mom, and the ordinary people chased her for a long time. My mom dragged me with her to Mojing City, but she couldn't make it and passed away. This is where it happened. While speaking, Yao Wei pointed to another place on the map. Looking at the route, it was further north, near the coastal area. Although it looked close to the coast on the map, in reality, it was still about half a day's drive away. It was similar to the distance between where Yao Wei's enemies were in Donghai City. From the south to the north, it was really quite a distance. Lu Xun couldn't help but wonder how severely Yao Wei's mother had been injured. She had to drag her wounded body so far with her daughter. Lu Xun didn't ask, but he felt that Yao Wei's mother must have been a new human too. But even as a new human, carrying a heavy injury and traveling so far must have been incredibly difficult, right? Do you want to go for revenge? Lu Xun asked. Yao Wei nodded and said, if I can, I definitely want to go. Lu Xun fell silent for a moment and then said, I'll help you. Yao Wei nodded again and said, let's wait until we're sure before going. Lu Xun chuckled, how do you judge when we're sure? Yao Wei said, make ourselves stronger, collect more weapons, and when we have the strength to surpass them, then we'll be sure. Lu Xun. It sounded like this woman thought these things were easy to accomplish. But perhaps because Yao Wei had such a belief, her shooting skills had improved so much. Lu Xun looked at Yao Wei. Her side profile was equally exquisite, and she always spoke so calmly, as if she was confident in whatever she did. He sighed and continued driving. He had originally just wanted to hitch a ride, but now, here he was. In a perfectly normal situation, the words I'll help you had just slipped out. His shooting skills were so bad, how could he help someone? Forget it, the words were already said, and there was no reason to go back on them. The place Yao Wei pointed to was still far away. One step at a time. Chapter 64, the theme of the world in this world. Lu Xun actually didn't have much of a goal. After time traveling and seeing the desolate, bone-chilling cold world, it was utterly despairing. At that time, in the extreme northern cold region, the ice and snow never melted all year round. The entire world, even at night, was just a vast expanse of white. There was nothing in any direction. East, west, south, or north. Only the company of wind and snow. Back then, all he wanted was to meet someone, anyone. Even if that person pulled out a gun and shot him with a bullet, at least he'd die having seen another living person. Luckily, he made it through, found the dog, and found food. Looking back now, he really couldn't believe how he survived without going crazy. After that, he kept heading south, and it wasn't until he reached Mazu City that he finally saw another living person. To be honest, though he was very cautious at that time and exchanged gunfire with people bang, bang, he was actually quite happy inside. Finally, he saw another person. It wasn't easy. The only downside was that those people, whether the wolf gang or the dog gang, always went straight into fighting upon meeting, giving him no chance to even talk. Until he met Yao. At the villa at 282 Jiang Road, Jiang District, Yubai City, he and Yao were upstairs and downstairs from each other. From the initial standoff with guns drawn, to later cooperating to fight the dogs, and then eventually hitching a ride, it had truly been a rare journey, with many stops along the way. Lu Xun really didn't expect that in this world, he would meet someone he could communicate with. Though their early communication did have some bumps. And those bumps, as well as the loneliness of walking alone before, made the present companionship seem that much more precious. Having a companion to trust completely, one who could help and support each other, was truly rare. Lu Xun never wanted to return to the lonely days of walking alone. So, he would never abandon this relationship. Therefore, a man should keep his word. Once he had spoken, there was no room for regret. He had made it through the ice and snow, so why should he be afraid of a mere group of enemies? Lu Xun thought to himself, his foot pressing the accelerator with more determination. After speaking, Yao closed the World Atlas Volume 1 and packed the map away. It was only then that Lu Xun suddenly noticed that the broadcast from the radio had stopped at some point. He stepped on the brakes and stopped the car. "What's wrong?" Yao asked. "The broadcast stopped," Lu Xun said. Yao had just noticed too. But she still didn't understand why Lu Xun had stopped the car. She heard him continue, "Should we turn back and check again?" "I'm not talking about the broadcast, I was thinking, does the radio need a signal tower to receive the broadcast?" "Signal tower?" Yao had never heard of this term. Lu Xun nodded and said, "This isn't my area of expertise, but I'm not sure if the radio receives signals via radio waves or through a signal tower. Though it feels like the radio should work with radio waves, and signal towers are for things like phones, what if the radio needs a signal tower?" Yao seemed to understand. "So, you want to check if there's a signal tower still operating, to see if we can go there?" "Yes." Lu Xun sighed, saying, "Sigh, it's all my fault for not studying these things properly. If I had learned more back then, I wouldn't be so lost now." But Yao said, "You're already amazing. I don't understand any of this." Her praise seemed sincere. Lu Xun glanced at Yao and smiled. Yao asked, "Do you know where signal towers are usually built?" Lu Xun immediately thought of places like the Oriental Pearl Tower, Guangzhou Tower, and Tokyo Sky Tree, and his mind got an idea. He said, "Forget it, no need to go. If there were a signal tower, it should be in the previous Tongzhou County. With our range of 10 or so kilometers, there shouldn't be any other place around here, right?" Yao opened the World Atlas Volume 1 again and said, "None." Lu Xun said, "Then it's clear. Even if there is a signal tower, it should be at the Tongzhou County TV station. There are already people occupying that place. If it was still useful, Fazai and the others would have discovered it and occupied it. Why would they be staying at a place like the gas station?" Earlier, he hadn't thought about where the signal tower should be, and his attention had been distracted by the National Emergency Relief Headquarters. He had been thinking about its structure, which made his thoughts go astray. Now that his mind had cleared up, he concluded that the radio should be receiving radio wave signals. "Let's keep going," he said. He released the brake and stepped on the gas pedal again. The cold wind howled ahead, blowing the grass on the roadside low, and a dark cloud was blown over, casting a large shadow as black as night. Lu Xun and Yao continued on, walking through the shadowed area, and when they finally emerged from under the cloud, the oppressive feeling lifted, and they felt refreshed. Lu Xun said, "Do you want to try the radio again and tune to other channels? Maybe besides the East Sea City Disaster Relief Headquarters, there are other places broadcasting, and we could hear something." "Okay." Yao nodded, removed the batteries from the radio, and then opened it up again, adjusting the knobs. This overly frugal woman had removed the batteries after turning off the radio earlier. But since they were just sitting in the car, the process of installing and removing the batteries wasn't much trouble for Yao. After installing them, she turned the radio knobs several times, but there was no response. Looks like there's nothing, Luz sighed. Of course, it could be the signal is weak here. We'll try again later. The theme of this world still seemed to be desolation and loneliness. Yao nodded and immediately turned off the radio, removing the batteries. Luz sighed, but she felt something entirely different. It seemed like relief. Yao didn't know why she felt this way. Clearly, finding more signals would give clues about this world, revealing more areas to explore, so why did she instinctively not want to find them? What was she afraid of? She frowned, put away the radio and the batteries, and glanced at Luz, who was driving. What's wrong? Luz noticed her gaze and asked. Nothing. Yao answered, her voice still calm and emotionless. But Yao knew this was because she hid her emotions well, or perhaps she had long gotten used to not expressing emotions through her voice. In truth, at this moment, she really wanted her words, nothing, to convey some emotion, so Luz could feel it. She didn't know why. Chapter 65, Fixing the Computer. The cold wave lasted for several days. In this kind of weather, if you don't find a place to hide and lay low, you'd freeze to death pretty easily. Or, if you didn't stock up enough food, you could starve to death. Luz felt really lucky to be a new human. Back when he first transmigrated, he was in a place even further north, where snow never melted year-round and the cold was that extreme. If he wasn't a new human, there's no way he would have made it. No wonder he hadn't run into a single person on the long journey south. In a world like that, how could anyone survive? Even if some new humans had once stayed there, they probably rushed to escape, right? He was also grateful he had found an air conditioner back in Yubai City and even managed to install it in the car. Thinking about the pre-Doomsday gasoline that had its shelf life extended with modified standards, Luz guessed that this air conditioner was probably specially developed and installed to deal with the apocalypse. Otherwise, why would there already be central air in that villa at number 272 Jiang Road, and yet they still installed an extra air conditioner in the bedroom? But despite all that effort and preparation, the world still ended up like this after Doomsday hit. The people who tried so hard to survive the end times must have been so hopeless. Braving the bitter cold, Luz and Yao drove forward, but only made it half a day. After half a day, they reached a gas station, and the fuel gauge showed more than half of their gas was gone. The spare fuel tank in the car was full, but in this sparsely populated world, they had to plan for all kinds of contingencies and do their best to ensure a fuel reserve. So when they arrived at this gas station, both of them thought it would be best to stop and see if they could refuel. But in weather this cold, trying to fill up might cause the fuel nozzle not to work. Once the weather warms up, the nozzle would start working again. It was a rare issue, but Yao had run into it before. Back then, she didn't understand why, but now, after discussing it with Luz, he had a guess. Maybe some places had already upgraded to the new standard fuel pumps designed to handle the apocalyptic winter and function in freezing temperatures, while other places hadn't gotten the chance to upgrade and couldn't cope. Of course, that was just his speculation. They tried having Dogsy connect the power and start up the fuel pump. The pump turned on just fine and showed there was gas in storage, but when they inserted it into the car's tank, no gas came out of the nozzle. So Luz and Yao decided to stay here for a bit, wait for the weather to warm up, try refueling again, and then move on. This gas station was called Zin Petroleum. Not Eternal Heaven Petrochemical Gas Station. No wonder the fuel pump wasn't upgraded, turns out it wasn't a big name chain. Luz and Yao went into the station building of this Zin Petroleum gas station to look around. Inside, it was completely empty, except for a computer sitting in the outbuilding office. It was strange. This computer was just sitting there, completely intact, not a single scratch. It was hard to believe that after all these years of the apocalypse, the computer had managed to avoid every round of disaster. Never smashed, never taken. Probably because this place is so remote that barely anyone comes by, and when people did come, there was already a massive blackout, so the computer couldn't be used and no one cared about it anymore. Luz squatted down to examine the computer, tossing out a random guess. The computer's tower was standing quietly on the floor. The connected monitor was on the desk, with the data cable and power cord running through a wiring hole on the desk, all linked together. Sounds about right. Yao said, if I came here alone, I wouldn't have bothered with it. After all, the thing was useless to her. Luz said, that's because you're more civilized. Some people destroy whatever they see. It's not like we haven't run into them before. Yao replied, then maybe the people who came here earlier were also pretty civilized. Luz gave her a surprised look. He didn't expect Yao to say something so pointless. Seriously, it was rare. This woman used to be so frugal, She wouldn't even waste a single extra word. Yao Wei met Lu Xin's gaze and felt a little uncomfortable, frowning slightly. Lu Xin had to look away and tried to get Dogsy to connect power to the computer. This woman. If this were a normal story, two people locking eyes like this would usually look away instinctively or something, right? But not Yao Wei. No wonder she was Yao Wei. She really wasn't like most people. The computer didn't react at all. Lu Xin tried tapping the tower lightly. Still nothing. Unwilling to give up, he smacked it a bit harder. Yao Wei looked confused. What are you doing? Fixing the computer. Lu Xin answered. Yao Wei. She'd seen computers before at the shelter under the reservoir at Dan Village, so she knew what they were. But this whole tap the computer box to fix it thing. She really didn't get it. Still, since Lu Xin knew so much, there must be a reason he was doing this, right? Yao Wei didn't question him. She just quietly watched, quietly waited. But it was useless. The computer still didn't respond at all. Maybe after sitting quietly here for decades, frozen for decades, it had silently broken down for good. Lu Xin sighed and stood up. Nope, can't fix it. Let's go. Let's park the car around the corner and warm up a bit inside. Yao Wei nodded and started to head out. Lu Xin followed behind, but as he walked, he got a little unwilling to give up. He turned back and removed the computer tower. The data cable, power cord, monitor, mouse, and keyboard. He left all of that behind. How about you go get the toolbox from the car? I'll give it another shot. Lu Xin walked out hugging the tower. Yao Wei turned back too and asked, don't need to take the rest of it? Nope. The main issue is the tower. If this thing can't be fixed, the rest is useless. I'll open it up and take a look. Lu Xin rubbed his hands as he spoke. This weather was brutal. Most people wouldn't be able to take it. It was normal that the computer couldn't either. He was a new human. The computer wasn't. Yao Wei noticed his movement and suggested, let's just warm up in the car first. Even if you fix that computer, we probably won't end up using it. Lu Xin thought about it and said, alright, let's warm up first. Then I'll come back to it. Who knows how long this cold wave will last. We've got to find something to do. Yao Wei didn't understand why Lu Xin bothered. For things that had no use, she always just gave up right away. But Lu Xin wasn't her, and she didn't expect him to be. She figured it was probably because he kept that strong sense of curiosity that Lu Xin knew so much and was so different from everyone else. Chapter 66, Good stuff. Back in the car, Dogsy connected the power to the air conditioner. After a while, the car finally warmed up. Lu Xin and Yao Wei sat on the car seats, both letting out a slow breath, feeling incredibly comfortable. In this bitter cold, the moment you get out of the car, your face stings from the freezing air, and it feels like your ears are about to fall off. It was only after entering the station building earlier that it felt a bit better. But even the station building wasn't as comfortable as the car. This air conditioner that could still work steadily in such frigid weather was nothing short of a blessing in the apocalypse. Lu Xin and Yao Wei exchanged a glance and couldn't help but smile. Thinking about how we're new humans, we really are lucky. I saw those ordinary people, almost all of them had some frostbite, especially on their ears. None of them escaped it. He sighed. Yao Wei nodded and said, it was that familiar M again. She thought Lu Xin was right. When she had no other suggestions, it was always just that one word. At first, Lu Xin had tried counting how many times Yao Wei said M in a day, but by now he'd given up. There were just too many. No point in counting. But I still don't get it. We were perfectly normal. How did we suddenly become new humans? Lu Xin said. He figured this was one question Yao Wei couldn't just answer with Sure enough, Yao Wei replied with 3 words, don't know. Lu Xin. This question. Next time they ran into Luo Ping, he definitely had to ask that guy. He forgot to last time. That guy even knew the types of new humans. Surely, he had some idea of how and why new humans appeared. And what type he and Yao Wei were. That was something he should ask too. After warming up in the car for a bit, Lu Xin felt his whole body relaxed, and his fingers became nimble again, so he grabbed Yao Wei's toolbox and got out of the car. As he stepped out, Yao Wei also opened the front passenger seat door. So he turned back and said, you don't have to get out. It's freezing out here. But Yao Wei shook her head and said, I want to take a look too. She just felt that she should go along. She couldn't let Lu Xin do all the work and freeze alone. This woman had always been firm in her decisions, so Lu Xin didn't try to stop her again. He figured they'd just get it done quickly, and he called Dogsy out too. They took down the computer tower, opened the toolbox, found the matching screwdriver, and unscrewed the tiny screws on the back cover one by one. Then they removed the panel, revealing the dust-covered interior of the case. Lu Xin took a look and asked Dogsy, Dogsy, can you fix it? Dogsy's eyes blinked twice, and he raised a dog leg fitted with toy motorcycle wheels, meaning, I'm just a dog, man. I don't even have hands. How am I supposed to fix anything? Luzin could only sigh and said, then can you check if any parts are broken? Dogsy's eyes started blinking as he scanned each component. Motherboard, hard drive, graphics card. And then his eyes stayed lit up, indicating nothing was wrong. Seeing this, Luzin thought for a moment and said, then let's try cleaning out the dust. In his previous life, he would have never bothered doing this. Even when his own computer tower was full of dust, it still worked fine. One time he tried cleaning it, and after that, it wouldn't even power on. But now, since the computer couldn't turn on anyway, and he had nothing else to do here, he figured it wouldn't hurt to give it a try. At worst, it'd still be dead. So Luzin grabbed a rag and started cleaning the dust. Ideally, they'd have a brush for this, but unfortunately, they didn't. The rag would have to do. Anyway, Luzin would never try blowing on it with his mouth. That was just torture for your nose and mouth. Yao Wei joined in to help. The two of them cleaned out most of the dust inside, then had Dogsy check the cables and monitor. Once confirmed everything was fine, they reconnected all the wires. Dogsy powered it up, and they pressed the switch. Whir. The tower actually came back to life. What kind of magic is this? Even Luzin couldn't help but exclaim. At that moment, he seriously suspected this computer might be an apocalypse-only model. Normal computers didn't get fixed this easily, right? Yao Wei gave Luzin a look, wondering what this magic thing was. The monitor had always been functional. It could turn on, but never displayed anything. The issue was with the tower. The tower whirred for at least 5 minutes while Luzin patted the case a few more times, and finally, the monitor lit up. It helped that Luzin and Yao Wei had enough patience and nothing else to do. Anyone else would have probably given up long before this. Once the screen turned on, it showed the date, September 20, 2098. Luzin figured this was likely the manufacturing date. Given the time frame, it really might have been an apocalypse-only computer. Having not been used for years, the computer was extremely sluggish. Luzin patiently worked through it, checking everything on the desktop and in the folders. This old-world machine, possibly an apocalypse-only computer, didn't have much on it. But it still had way more than the one in Tan Village Shelter. There was an accounting system, a video player, and a music player. The accounting system was just a basic ledger. It wasn't integrated with the fuel pump system like in the old world. Luzin wasn't sure whether it was because this world's systems were behind, or if the old world intentionally designed it this way before the apocalypse. So that if the system failed, people could still refuel. Thinking about how fuel pumps these days could work just by being powered on. It probably had something to do with this. The players were all disconnected from the internet. But that didn't matter. Luzin found some locally stored videos and music in the folders. He tried playing one of the videos,